The NFL draft came and the NFL draft went, and with it, every single fan base in the NFL has hope. They are excited about their young rookies coming in to reshape their programs or continue the excellence which they have already displayed. And as always happens, every draft's getting a little bit overrated, it feels like. I'm seeing these grades where 25, 26 teams get B's or higher. It's ridiculous. Some of these drafts were objectively great and some were terrible. So let's get into the nitty-gritty, talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of these draft classes. First off, the Minnesota Vikings. And while they did not have a lot of day 2 picks or day 3 picks, they hit it out of the park in the first round. JJ McCarthy, clear high floor guy, capable of being a very functional game manager, worst case scenario, going into a super talented offense with one of the best play callers in the NFL, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones, good offensive line. And then to follow that pickup with getting Dallas Turner, most people's edge one, who was passed on by so many teams for whatever reason, is just fantastic. When I look at Dallas Turner, I see someone with an athletic profile comparable to DeMarcus Ware. Just these long arms. He can tie his shoes standing up without bending over at the waist or the knees. A freakish athlete, 4.4 speed, big body. Run defense needs a little bit of work, but he tries to play it, and there's something to be said for that. I think both those picks are going to be day one start, maybe not JJ Dale, but day one contributors. Certainly, as the season goes on, are going to progress, show off their elite talent, and really elevate the franchise. You can say what you want, oh, capital this, volume that. If you hit it out of the park in the first round, if you get 2 studs at positions of value, what more do you ask for? That is a great draft class if both those guys work out.
I think it's kind of hard to know exactly what JJ McCarthy is. I happen to like him a lot. I think the argument against him that he didn't throw a lot in college, Michigan didn't ask him to do a whole lot, I find that to be a bit lazy just because when it comes down to it in college, in the NFL, you need a quarterback who's going to run your offense to its highest potential in order to win football games. And the Michigan offense, it was built off the offensive line, it was built off their running game, and when he needed to make throws on third down in the clutch, he made those plays and led them to an undefeated national championship season. So that criticism that he didn't have to throw a lot, I think is a little silly because we do see that high-end athleticism. He does have a very solid arm. He made plays when he needed to in big moments on third and long in the red zone. He's capable of that. What I will say is that even on the flip side, there is some truth to the small sample size. We don't exactly know what's going to happen when he may have to throw the ball 30 times a game. We don't know what's going to happen when he's consistently throwing the ball that many times, that many games in a row. I doubt we're going to see with the Vikings an offense where Aaron Jones is running the ball 20 times and whoever's backup is running it another 15 times and JJ McCarthy's only asked to pass the ball to Justin Jefferson 5 times a game. So there is some unknown there. There is some unknown to how he will perform in an offense that likes to air the ball out. With that being said, I do like the draft class. There is a whole lot of boom to this draft class. This could be the best draft class when we look back at it 3, 4, a year from now even. But there's a whole lot of bust to this draft class. There's 6 quarterbacks taken
Pause. So you can't just say a whole lot of bust in the draft class without getting a pause on there.
There were 6 quarterbacks taken in the top 12. Whether we like it or not, no matter how much you love each of these quarterback prospects, one of them, if not multiple, are not going to be all that great. The likelihood that all 6 are starting quarterbacks 3 years from now is not all that high. I mean, we take a look back at the Trevor Lawrence draft class. He's the only one that's still a starter in the NFL.
So hold on. I think I know where you're going with this. Let me cut you off the pass and save the readers a little bit of time. Quarterbacks are not going to work out in this draft class, and one of those might be JJ McCarthy, just due to the nature of the NFL, which I agree with. But if we're going to levy that criticism at this draft class, we can do that with every single team which picked a quarterback. We can do that with every single team who picked a defensive end in the first round. All these guys have massive variance, and just saying, oh, well, a lot of guys went here and not all of them are going to work out. Make actual criticisms of the picks instead of the NFL draft in general. I also want to touch on the fact that you brought up the limited volume and sample size in college. When you look at the efficiency numbers, the per pass numbers, you compare JJ McCarthy to another Jim Harbaugh quarterback, Andrew Luck in college, the yards per attempt, the interception to touchdown ratio, the completion percentage, the quarterback rating, all those things are very similar in JJ's final year and Andrew Luck's final year. The difference is Andrew Luck did not have a high-powered run game backing him up, and he also played in the Pac-12. Those are very different systems than playing in the Big Ten. If Andrew Luck could have only passed the ball 20 times a game on Stanford and they had won the national championship doing that, I guarantee you Jim Harbaugh will have done that. It is a question of what works and what doesn't. And there would be valid criticisms behind he has a limited sample size, if not for the fact Michigan won the national championship, got very rarely challenged during their run to the title, only by Alabama and Ohio State. They dominated everyone running the ball. Why would they possibly throw the ball? They're not in the business of developing quarterback prospects to go to the NFL and get drafted with the first overall pick. They're in the business of winning football games.
And I agree with that. And I think the people that completely write JJ McCarthy off were ridiculous in the first place for using those criticisms in that way. I'm just saying, when it comes to JJ McCarthy and the Vikings, I do still think there's an element. You said high floor. I don't think we exactly know what his floor is because the sample size in college is not that large, and we don't know what he's going to look like in an offense when he's asked to pass the ball at a much higher rate. They're not going to run the ball as much as they did in college, especially when you have Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, and TJ Hockenson, who make your life a whole lot easier as a passer, of course, especially the offensive tackles they have. But you mentioned the efficiency. That efficiency will probably go down in the NFL with the volume going up.
JJ McCarthy moves around the pocket very well when the pocket collapses. I know people talk about the Michigan offensive line. This year's Michigan offensive line was not as good as that of years past. We're not the best O-line in the country. There were games that had to go away from the pass, not because JJ McCarthy wasn't capable, and we'll get into that Penn State game later when I talk about Miami, but because there was so much pressure coming off the edge and from the interior that he would have had maybe a second and a half to set his feet before he was getting hit or harassed. That O-line wasn't good. JJ moved around in the pocket. Wasn't great. It wasn't generational. And JJ still navigated the pocket and can attack the middle of the field at a high volume. He does not throw his guys into hits. He puts the ball on him. He puts them on top of him, maybe even a little bit behind him if it means protecting his players when he needs to get to him in stride. I'm serious. You can go look at JJ McCarthy throw high balls when he just threw it right in front of him.
He said he puts his balls on top of them.
Well, that's what he's going to be doing to the Packers, Lions, and Bears later on. But clearly willing to attack the middle field, can move around the pocket. Those are the signs of a high floor. Paired with the complete lack of character concerns I have for him, being a very good leader in college, having no off-the-field issues, yeah, that's a high floor. Moving the pocket well, attack over the middle field. Maybe he can't hit those home run balls in the NFL on the outside. Maybe he can't scramble as well. That's stuff relating to his ceiling. The floor is high with JJ.
You don't necessarily know what his ceiling is then, is what you're saying.
Oh, yeah, he could have a high ceiling, he could have a low ceiling. I'm just saying the floor is good, and on top of the floor being good individually, he's going to the Vikings, man. Best offensive system in football for a young quarterback. People are going to talk about the Bears' 3 receivers. Mediocre play calling at best. Average offensive line just being overrated because of how bad it was in years past. An old Keenan Allen, a DJ Moore who wasn't close to Justin Jefferson, and a rookie wide receiver who has proven nothing. Vikings are the best possible system this guy could go to. Has a high floor, like I've been saying, as an individual. It's going to work out.
So as where I'm saying I feel like he has a high ceiling and kind of undetermined floor, you're more so on the high floor, undetermined ceiling.
Yes.
Okay, so we're just on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Well, one of us is on the spectrum. Since we've been talking about JJ so long, I'm going to bring up Walter Rouse, who is a late-round offensive tackle pick from Oklahoma. I think he was the best tackle taken out of Oklahoma this year. He has a very high level of run blocking and pass blocking. The size and athleticism, there may be some concerns with that, with how he moves in space, but the Vikings already have Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw and have issues at guard. I wouldn't be surprised if they bounce this 6'6" dude inside, let him show off that superior run blocking form against NFL defensive linemen, make it a little bit more fair in terms of a speed matchup, and let him go be a meaningful contributor as a guard.
The real question is, how many points is Will Riker going to score?
I do not concern myself with the affairs of the kickers. Until he hits a game-winning Super Bowl kick, he will be a kicker, and then when he does, I'll remember his name. I might even buy his jersey.
You should be buying his jersey, getting ready for the season.
I'm good, man. Anyway,
all-time SEC points leader.
Congratulations. It just means more up in the Big Ten. Anyway, who would you like to talk about now?
Well, we mentioned JJ McCarthy. Do we want to stick with Jim Harbaugh and go to the Chargers?
Let's go to the Chargers.
You want me to go first?
I will merely say that if you're upset that the Chargers drafted Joe Alt, the consensus best tackle in the draft, I like Olu personally, but Joe Alt's really effing good, incredibly athletic, and is going to be able to play perfectly well on either side of the line. If you are upset about that stud going into a Jim Harbaugh system, you are the casual supreme, the casual deluxe, the king of casuals. That's you if you don't like this pick.
I like Justin Herbert more than the people who heavily criticize him, more than the Tua brigade, more than the people who hate on him for not having that much playoff success, or really any playoff success at this point in his career. I like Justin Herbert, but his fan base, if they did not take Joe Alt this season, and they did not add to that offensive line, if Justin Herbert were getting murdered again next season by pass rushers on the ground, gets injured, all we would hear is, Jim Harbaugh isn't protecting Justin Herbert. What are the Chargers front office doing? We don't have a good enough offensive line.
They're going to complain either way, man. That's how these people are.
This is true. But that's all you would have been talking about. And now Jim Harbaugh gives you you have one bookend tackle in Rashawn Slater. Now you're adding another one in Joe Alt. He's giving you that. They added Ladd McConkey at the top end of the second round, who I think is a very good prospect in a loaded receiver class. You add that to the wide receiver room that has Quentin Johnston, who you'd hope Jim Harbaugh would use more to his strengths as a receiver. You have Josh Palmer, who battled through injuries but has been a very solid receiver throughout his career. And later in the draft, you added Junior Colston, who we know Jim Harbaugh has worked with him before. They lost both middle linebackers in free agency. So I loved the Chargers draft class. I really think the areas that they addressed fit perfectly with their needs and also what Jim Harbaugh wants as far as building a winning culture. And the high-end success may not come this season and may be slightly further down the line when it comes to building everything up, but I liked what they did.
Yeah, Junior Colston is the only player in the country who's going to be able to go from his college system to the pros and have absolutely nothing change. Same defensive coordinator, same head coach. Only difference, instead of playing in Michigan, he's playing in LA, which property taxes being what they are, state income and whatnot, hurts him a little bit more there, but probably a bit nicer to be in LA for December and January than in Michigan. Leaving that aside, Ladd McConkey, Jim Harbaugh knows exactly how good he is. He was on the receiving end of a Ladd McConkey showcasing a little bit, if my memory serves. I may be thinking of another white boy from Georgia who cooked him that first playoff appearance. Could be wrong. I am sure, though, even if I am wrong, Harbaugh had watched a lot of Georgia film and was ready for that matchup if it came down to it. McConkey's good. QJ is probably going to be a much more outside, go-deep type of threat, more versatile offense. And they signed two meaningful running backs. At least meaningful, they can be behind an offensive line, Dobbins and Edwards. That is going to be the focus of the Chargers offense. They're going to run the ball. They're going to let Herbert get in rhythm, throw over the middle to McConkey, to his tight ends, and they're going to play winning football. Justin Herbert's not going to be asked to throw the ball 40, 50 times in a game. Much more closer to like 30-ish and have an established running game. This is Jim Harbaugh football. It's not aesthetically pleasing, but it is winning football.
Who knows? Maybe Brendan Rice turns into Jerry Rice on the Chargers, follows in his father's footsteps.
Next team. Keeping it with teams centered around the Big Ten, the Miami Dolphins went out there and got Chop Robinson. And I was higher on Chop than most people. Obviously, some of the physical athletic stuff less than you'd like it to be. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The combine is meaningless in the grand scheme of things. But my takeaways from Chop is watching that Michigan-Penn State game and realizing that he is the reason JJ McCarthy was not a top 5 pick. They did not pass the ball once in that second half against Penn State because Chop was bullying the Michigan tackles, dominating off the edge. JJ was never going to have a clean pocket, never going to have a safe lane to throw in, not going to be able to step up and move around the pocket because an athletic freak like Chop Robinson was coming off the edge and was going to disrupt anything they tried to do. That guy is now going to Miami. And you can say what you want about the Dolphins getting raided in free agency, losing Christian Wilkins, losing Van Ginkel, being worse on defense. I'd agree with you on that. But in terms of replacements for an edge rusher, in terms of bolstering that defensive line, Chop is pretty real. The Dolphins know they're going to be in games where they have to rush the passer. It's the nature of how they do things. They're not playing slow and methodical. They're not dancing back and forth with you. They want high-scoring games. And guys who can get after the quarterback in high-scoring games are an indispensable asset. I love the Dolphins draft, not only because of the Chop pick, but the Chop pick was certainly a big reason.
Well, they'll hopefully have Bradley Chubb back, and then you have Jalen Phillips, you have Chop now. So if it all pans out and everything breaks the right way, could be an elite trio for Miami to get after the quarterback, all the great quarterbacks that are in the AFC. From that standpoint, I think it's a good pick. Miami, I'm just worried about what their ceiling truly is with Tua in the playoffs, in cold weather, in big moments. But many of my thoughts as far as the Chop pick are pretty similar to yours.
Also talk about Jalen Wright here from Tennessee. People say, oh, they got Raheem, they got Achin or Achin, however you say his name. Both those guys are either older or have dealt with injuries in the past, and when they got hurt and the Dolphins didn't have that 1-2 punch in the backfield, they weren't as good rushing the ball. So putting in Jalen Wright in that system, maybe he doesn't have to play immediately, but he is still going to be a big asset. He gives them depth, he gives them a backup plan if somebody goes down. I like that pick, and really, if they can get something going offensively with him, if he can build up momentum, he could be the best running back in this draft class.
It is a bit of an odd pick just from the standpoint they have two established starters, but
How old's Raheem Mostert again? Like 52?
he's not 52, and AJ did deal with injuries. But when you look at where McDaniels comes from, the 49ers, they were always drafting running backs in the later rounds and investing in that position, and they always found talent down the board. So I trust that whether it's this season, the next season, Jalen Wright will probably contribute to Miami in some type of way because I trust who's evaluating and making the draft pick there.
Since we're talking about injuries to the Dolphins offense, Patrick Paul out of Houston, I think he's a bit more of a developmental guy at the tackle position, probably not going to start year one. But the Dolphins offensive line is not special to begin with and dealt with injuries last year. So I've got no issue with them going out and spending an early day 2 pick on offensive tackle. I like that pick for him too. Again, they're adding depth of positions they needed, where that be due to age, inexperience, injuries, whatnot. They're adding guys where they need to offensively to keep that offense clicking, and they got one of the best edge rushers in the draft towards the back end of the first round. That's a good draft for Miami, which no one's really talking about.
So everyone obviously has graded the Chicago Bears draft as when you see the letter grades out there, A+, A-, A. Those may throw a B+ out there. Their draft was phenomenal. They addressed areas of need. They obviously had the first overall pick, drafted Caleb Williams, the number 1 overall prospect basically on everyone's big board. And then they added Rome Odunze with their 9th overall pick. And they have built an offense that has prepared a young quarterback to succeed more than any other number 1 overall pick we have ever seen in recent memory. I mean, yes, Keenan Allen is old. He'll probably be gone after this season, but they have DJ Moore. Now you add Rome Odunze. They have, who's their tight end? I'm brain
Cole
farting.
Kmet.
They have Cole Kmet. Their offensive line, you took a shot at it earlier, but it is solid, especially when it comes to a number 1 overall pick. So the things they have done to support Caleb Williams, getting Caleb Williams in the building, great draft class. I like what they did. They also added offensive tackle depth who has positional flexibility in the 3rd round. So I think that was also a great pick. I kind of have to eat my words a little bit when it comes to what I said about Ryan Pace a while ago. Granted, I could not factor in Ryan Poles. What I said about him when it comes to his draft class, granted I could not necessarily factor in that the Panthers would be as bad as they were and they'd wind up with the number 1 overall pick, but Caleb Williams, Odunze, adding a tackle who has positional flexibility to go in and play guard, I think it was a great draft class for them.
Obviously, Caleb Williams, gem of the draft, everybody wanted him. When people talk about him, the talent is undoubtedly there. He could be one of the 5 guys who we talk about being in that best quarterback discussion in that tier right below Patrick Mahomes. I don't see anyone really catching Mahomes besides maybe Josh Allen, maybe Lamar, but he could be one of those guys. I think people are slightly overrating how low his floor is. When things could go wrong in that building, whether that be due to character concerns, play style, questionable footwork in a pocket, they could go really wrong. Caleb Williams has issues in his game. Can he rise above those issues? Probably to a certain extent. I have a hard time seeing him crash out entirely, but the opportunity to crash out is there. As for the Odunze pick, it's pretty clearly Keenan Allen's a 1-year rental type of deal. We don't think he's going to be your long-term, and we certainly don't think he's going to be one of the premier options long-term. I like the other receivers more than Odunze, but it's neither here nor there. They're getting someone who's already building that relationship with their quarterback and getting that connection.
Who'd you like more than Odunze? The 2 they didn't have an opportunity to draft?
I didn't really like Malik Neighbors that much. We can get into the receivers I like later on. At the end of the day, this draft class goes based off how good Caleb Williams is. And if Caleb Williams fails in Chicago, it's not due to the offensive line. It's not due to the weapons around him. It's due to Caleb Williams. Kind of the same thing you can say about JJ McCarthy. Drake May, if he fails in New England, maybe that's on the entire system. Jaden Daniels, if he fails in Washington, maybe that's on the system. Maybe that's on the O-line. Penix, yeah, the front office already failed him, but we can get into that later. Bo Nix, I mean, I got some words for Sean Payton too. But
So
these are the two guys we are going to see based off their merits are going to succeed or fail next year. Ultimately, I think there is a higher chance if one of them's really going to fail, though, it's going to be Caleb.
Well, there's more organizational dysfunction if we can, I don't know how much there is there, but more likely to describe Chicago in that way than we are the Vikings. So if we're going purely based off merits and blame game, it'd probably be McCarthy as far as sole reason their career is not successful.
Oh, you see no reason that Caleb Williams could potentially not work out? None whatsoever?
No. You just described that the situation around the quarterback and...
The situation's not an excuse, Tristan. This team won 7 games and got better. I get what you're trying to say. Oh, well, things are slightly better in Minnesota. Yeah, there's a reason Caleb Williams went 9 picks ahead of JJ McCarthy. He is a much more highly touted prospect. We cannot put any blame on either of these situations. It's off their own merits. And if their own merit's there, hey, great. The NFC North's going to be loaded at quarterback for the next decade. Woohoo. If it's not, I'm going to make a lot of TikToks about it. Now that we have talked about the highs, let's get into the lows. The lowest of the lows. The one draft everyone seems comfortable criticizing. And while some people are trying to say, well, they're set at this position for the next decade, that's something to be said. I don't care. The Falcons drafting Michael Penix with the 8th overall pick is the worst pick in the draft. And unless the stars perfectly align, it will be the worst pick in the draft for years to come. You cannot make that type of move. I feel like anything we say is going to be beating a horse which is not only dead, but has already been buried by everyone else. You don't like the pick, I don't like the pick. We probably don't like it for the same reason everyone else doesn't like it. You sign Kirk Cousins, you immediately throw him under the bus by bringing in a rookie quarterback to, I don't care what you say, compete with him. It's just not a good move, particularly for a win-now team, which the Falcons should be.
It feels a lot like, obviously different position, different circumstances, in some ways much higher stakes, but it feels like the Raiders a few years ago during the Gruden and Mayock regime, where they were just making draft picks that kind of bucked the trend of conventional wisdom or what people thought they should do based on their positional needs and where they thought they should go. And they're following this train of logic like, oh yeah, we need a quarterback to move on to. Let's be like the Packers, and we'll have this veteran quarterback and then have a rookie sit behind him. Meanwhile, that veteran quarterback has no goodwill in their locker room. It's not like he's been their starter for the past decade and they just re-signed a new contract to keep playing for them, and then they drafted a rookie behind him. That would be a much different circumstance that I think more people would be on board with. But it's a quarterback that's never played for you before. You're signing him to take advantage of what you feel like are some elite weapons on offense in a defense that you're looking to build with a defensive head coach and a quarterback that has the ability to win a lot of regular season games. So it's not that. You're trying to be different for no reason. You're trading up for a defensive tackle when there was still Jerzon Newton, Johnny Newton, and there's still Braden Fisk on the board, and you traded up Ruka
Roro is his name. Good pronunciation. He's a developmental piece too. He's going to need at least a year to sit behind someone.
One of those 3 probably would have been on the board.
Pardon?
One of those 3 probably would have been on the board when they were actually picking versus having to trade up for him.
Rook probably would have been there. I don't think anyone was going to swoop in and steal him right out from under him. Maybe one of those good teams just picking near the back end of the draft comes up there, but still, it's not a good pick. It's we're building for the future type of move. Again, we don't need to drum on this. Later rounds, Trice out of Washington, he's a pretty all right pick. But at the end of the day, if you're walking out of your first 2 rounds with maybe one day one contributor, you've had a bad draft, particularly when you're in win now mode. Speaking of drafting quarterbacks, the Denver Broncos going out there and not getting JJ McCarthy, and then having Sean Payton laugh about it and said, oh, well, haha, we actually never wanted JJ McCarthy. We didn't want him at all. No. We want Bo Nix. That is idiocy right there. Bo Nix is a 24-year-old veteran, a beneficiary of COVID, a guy who would not have been looked at as a day 2 pick at this time last year, but because he has more experience, is older, was able to dominate somewhat weaker competition and weaker Pac-12 defenses. You get that guy, which is really just screaming to me, I have no faith in my ability to develop quarterbacks. Unless this guy's good to go day 1, I'm cooked. That's what that's telling me from Sean Payton. You waste your time and your resources wooing JJ McCarthy, making him work out. Maybe you could have used that time scouting other players. Some of your other picks in the draft also terrible. And then sit up there and laugh about, oh, well, we got our guy.
Sounds like you're a little
We forced
salty.
a team in the AFC to get better by getting additional draft picks to screw over the Vikings, who are not in your conference, who you are going to play once every 4 years, and whose only reason you have to be bitter at is because they put their nuts on your head the last time they saw you in the playoffs. That is skullduggery gone wrong right there. Also, I don't like the Bo Nix pick in general.
It sounds like you're a little salty about the comment Sean Payton made and that he...
Why would I be salty? I got a franchise quarterback on my team. He's got Bo Nix.
What do you have against Bo Nix?
Old, not that good, unless everything is clicking absolutely perfectly. He is terrible out of structure. The accuracy numbers at various points in the field aren't what you'd like him to be. And he put up meaningful numbers against Pac-12 defenses. Also, I don't think he's a closer.
I like Bo. I don't love Bo Nix. I
like him at 12?
I think it's fine at 12. I mean, when you look at the Broncos, where were they going to go with quarterback? Were they going to draft Spencer Rattler?
I'd rather
Were they going to start Zach Wilson? Are they going to start Zach Wilson?
I'm pretty sure Zach Wilson's still younger than Bo Nix, so you might as well throw that out there and see if you can make it work.
I don't know. I like the pick. I don't necessarily like the Broncos. I don't believe a lot in the pieces that they have on offense. Courtland Sutton has been a very good, one of the lone bright spots for them. But as a team, I mean, you got the Chiefs, you got the Chargers now of Jim Harbaugh, and they're building something. It's the AFC. I still don't think they're going to be a playoff team, but I think he could be a very good quarterback in the NFL. I don't hate the pick. I'm not in love with it. I don't have strong feelings about it.
I think he can be a very good quarterback. By being in the NFL, he's a top half quarterback in the NFL. He is one of the 32 best quarterbacks. He's got upside to be that. I also don't like the Jonah Ellis pick out of Utah. I think that pick probably could have waited until maybe a round later. The Troy Franklin pick, I mean, you got a better version of Jalen Hyatt in the 4th round. If that means anything to you, fine. I don't think he's got the type of separation speed that a true number
better
one
version of
threat
Jalen Hyatt
will have in the NFL. I think he'll look a little bit slower on the field against professional cornerbacks instead of those Pac-12 bozos, but wait and see. Not a good draft, though.
Jalen Hyatt won the award for best receiver in college football.
How's that working out for him?
He played 1 year, and now it's just because he's on the Giants, you're like, oh, he sucks, look at him.
Well, guess what? Troy Franklin's now going to a situation where he's got a mid-quarterback, bad offensive line, and questionable head coach who is riding off years of previous glory offensively. It's the same thing. The only difference is Troy Franklin has a guy who's thrown to him in college. Big whoop. By the time he's going to be a little bit better, he's going to get 600 yards instead of 500. Woohoo.
Can I transition?
If you want to get the replacement surgery, by all means.
Oh, God.
Give us a flag to put in the background on your side.
I haven't read into a lot of discussion about this team, whether it be good or bad, but I liked their draft class, and I see the upside with the draft class. I like the direction they went. The Carolina Panthers, they drafted Xavier Leggett at the back end of the 1st round. They traded up to do so. They gave Bryce Young another receiver to throw to. They added Deontay Johnson, of course, in free agency or the offseason cycle. So now he's got receivers to throw to. Later in the draft, they added a tight end, Jatavian Sanders, who kind of has a very high ceiling. He's kind of an athletic freak. There were some question marks that were sort of floated out there as to maybe some character concerns as to why he fell in the draft, but they also added the best running back in the draft in Jonathan Brooks.
Blake Corum plays for the Rams.
To give Bryce Young some more help. So I liked what they did a lot with their draft picks. The only thing where I was kind of like, oh, I don't like it as much is they didn't add any young depth to that offensive line. And I know they added Robert Hunt and they added Damian Lewis at guard in the offseason. But it would have been nice, I think, to see maybe in the back half of the draft. And I know that these picks aren't likely to necessarily ever be contributors or be contributors day one, but maybe add some offensive line depth at later in the draft. But overall, I actually liked what they did, despite what I think about their ownership.
It's Leggett, not Leggett, first off. Second off, they got a good running back. They got the tight end too in the draft, and they got a good depth piece of receiver. If they needed to make the trade to get back up into the 1st round to get him, I'm questionable of that. I think Keon Coleman probably would have gone there to the Bills either way, but that's besides the point. They've got a good receiving trio. The offensive line's been built up. They have better weapons for Bryce Young, and they've given him the opportunity to succeed. It is a completely different team than what he walked into as a rookie. Certainly had a lot more draft capital used on it to make it better. No issues with the Panthers draft whatsoever. A draft I do have issue with is the Dallas Cowboys. And it is getting back to our good pal Jerry Jones's comment. We are going all in. Then they don't sign their best free agent offensive tackle. They lose their best free agent cornerback. And in the draft, instead of getting a skill player in the deepest wide receiver draft we have seen in a long time, instead of making a move like that, they draft the offensive tackle 6, I want to say, in the first round. Get another offensive tackle in the third round. Get a... Are we calling Tyler? I don't even know if he's a defensive end or an interior guy or what. Get a defensive lineman, though, in the second round who is not even going to be a meaningful day one contributor. This is not a move to say, oh, we are going all in and trying to win this year. This is a, I'm building my lines up for the future type of move. Jerry Jones is not heavily invested in this season. I think there's a real chance Dak Prescott walks from this team, whether that be of his own volition or Jerry's, after the end of this year. Jerry is building for the future on a team which should be trying to compete and win now. That was a bad draft by the Cowboys.
I'm never going to call the Cowboys draft a bad draft when they did need to replace some pieces on their offensive line. And when we look at how they've developed offensive line and their ability to evaluate talent at offensive line and make it work in Dallas, I'm never going to criticize them until they start to show us that they're no longer good at doing that. So I'm not going to overly hate the Tyler Guyton pick. I
don't like the Cooper Beebe pick. I'm going to be honest with you. I think he got massively overrated in this whole draft process. I really do.
I trust the Cowboys when it comes to drafting and developing offensive line. Where I think the Cowboys made a major mistake, and where I do agree with you, is how can you be all in when you don't re-sign Tony Pollard? You let Zeke walk last year because you felt he was the better running back and you franchise tagged him. Now you let him walk. Now you go back and re-sign even a lesser version of Zeke to come back and be your starting running back. You don't even address it in the draft. I don't get with 2 third-round picks. At one of them, you have Corum still on the board. You have Benson on the board at one point. You have Marshawn Lloyd on the board with your second third-round pick. How do you not address running back with any of those picks when you have those high-end talents with a lot of upside in a later round pick? It's not an exorbitant amount of draft capital you would have been spending on the position. And you're going to rely on Zeke to come back and be your bell cow back? I don't understand that.
Hey, Rico Dottle, man. We got Rico Dottle coming in to rush behind them boys up front.
Dottle and Zeke, I don't see a whole lot of potential there. I'm okay with them drafting and continuing to keep that offensive line strong. I'm fine with them going with CD, Jake Ferguson, and Brandon Cooks as their main receiving weapons.
You know how old Brandon Cooks is?
I get it. It's okay.
It's not okay. No, it's not okay. You are okay with this because you were a Giants fan preying on their downfall. That's fine. That is a perfectly all right position to have. But when you're going to draft Marshawn Nealon in the second round, a MAC defensive end who is going to get bullied at the NFL level, instead of any of the skill players available to you, he's done it again, ladies and gentlemen. We have entered record levels of it not being the Cowboys' year, and it hasn't even started yet. Truly a wonderful season ahead of us.
The Rams, phenomenal draft. They're up with these other good teams when it comes to filling holes on their roster and identifying what they need. Aaron Donald retired this offseason, and what did they do to try and replace that production, if that is even possible?
Replace him in the aggregate, Tristan. Replace him in the aggregate.
They added Jared Verse. They added Brandon Fisk, someone who can rush the passer off the edge, someone who can rush the passer from the interior, and they made that front seven better with their first 2 picks in the draft. I love the way they addressed that departure. The defensive line outside of Aaron Donald was not, or the defense in general was not the best in the world. world last season. So adding those pieces, I think, strengthens what was maybe a weakness. They had the receivers already. They have the quarterback. They have a good enough tight end. In the third round, they added Blake Corum, who I think was a great draft pick, and some people may be raising their eyebrows because of how good Kyren Williams has wound up being, but he's missed 12 games over the past 2 seasons. And how many times are they going to re-sign Darrell Henderson to come in and fill in and be a starter for a few weeks when that could be the difference between winning a game and losing a game, is if you're able to get consistent production from the running back position. So their first 3 picks, I think they knocked absolutely out of the park.
Blake Corum's winning that starting job by week 6. He was the best running back in the draft class. He can do a lot out of the backfield, more than people give him credit for. And the only real knock on his game is he doesn't have the true burner speed of the high tier guys. He can still run away from linebackers and defensive linemen. He's not going to beat safeties in a foot race, but really how many guys are? He's better at seeing holes than anyone in the draft class. He's better at bending around blocks, manipulating stuff in the backfield. It's Le'Veon Bell-esque when you get right down to it. At his level of athleticism, probably not as good as Le'Veon Bell, but then again, maybe Le'Veon Bell wasn't as good as Le'Veon Bell if you look at some of his later years. It is a phenomenal pick. Addressing the front 7, getting the 2 defensive linemen out of Florida State, also a fan of that. Rams had a good draft class. I laughed at the people who mocked Bo Nix, fawned them, and the Rams saying, oh, well, we need a Matthew Stafford replacement. Let's get Bo Nix. That would have made this a terrible draft class. I'm glad they avoided that issue, whether that be to their own draft protocols or Sean Payton stepping up and taking the bullet for him. Now, the Bengals, some people don't like the draft class because Amarius Mims is a redundant player. They've got the Browns playing tackle already. 2 big-bodied, 6'8", 330-plus pound men. Why do you need another guy in that room doing the exact same thing with the exact same physical archetype? Well, I'm high on Mims. I think he is a really good tackle with a lot of potential. A really good tackle with a lot of potential. The upside is certainly there from a physical standpoint. I think he needs some time. I think he needs a little bit of time to develop, and no better place to do that than behind 2 guys of his exact same archetype. Besides, if push comes to shove, he can go inside and be a 6'8" offensive guard and really just bully some poor interior D line. I like that pick. The Bengals need to solidify that offensive line. Even in the case of injuries up there, they need to protect Joe Burrow. We've seen the injuries, needs to happen. Chris Jenkins, freakish athlete. Obviously, it's hard to replace DJ Reader, who was one of the best run stoppers in the NFL. Chris Jenkins is going to do a pretty reasonable job of that. Of the players available at that pick, he was the best interior defensive lineman. He is going to translate great to the NFL, comes from Michigan, big contributor on that national championship team, NFL pedigree, his dad who played for 10 years, and physically, one of the most dominant defensive tackles in the draft. I am a big fan of those first 2 picks, addressing areas of need and giving Joe Burrow some more help.
Yeah, while Amarius Mims may not start right away just because he plays tackle and he's played tackle and they have 2 tackles that are lined up to be their starters, I like the pick because you look, Joe Burrow has been injured multiple times already throughout his career, doesn't have a whole lot of healthy seasons under his belt. We've seen that he can be one of the 3 best quarterbacks in the NFL already. He's the only one that seemingly ever really challenges Mahomes with the weapons he's throwing to on that offense. Adding depth to that offensive line in general is something that I think is underrated by a lot of fans. And like I said, maybe he steps in and plays guard as a massive human, not exactly the prototypical guard size. Maybe he does that or replaces Trent Brown or whoever if they get injured or they leave in the future. So I
Trent or Orlando Brown. It's the dynamic duo of Browns and the tackles. They also got Jermaine Burton out of Alabama, who admittedly I've not watched a ton of film of, but based on the fact he was an Alabama wide receiver, I could see him stepping up, being a rotational player year 1, maybe replacing someone like T. Higgins if he were to depart for whatever reason.
Well, they haven't signed Tyler Boyd, so.
Maybe replacing Tyler Boyd. Who knows? I like that pick in the 3rd round by him too.
Jaguars. I fell out of love with the Jaguars last season as they fell apart, as Trevor Lawrence got injured. Even before the injury, the offense did not live up to the expectations that I had set for them. I thought they were going to be high-flying. I thought they'd be scoring all over the place. That didn't exactly take place. And when they signed Gabe Davis, let Calvin Ridley walk, the vision for their future was not exactly clear, but with the Brian Thomas draft pick, pick and signing Gabe Davis, I love what they've done with the pieces on their offense. Calvin Ridley was good last year, but he was not as explosive as Brian Thomas. And adding a 6'3 receiver with 4'3 speed on the outside, you add Gabe Davis, who has some massive games. He has been very productive in the NFL. It doesn't happen every week, but he can be very good on the outside. And then you have Christian Kirk, who has been an excellent slot receiver when healthy. And then you have a tight end who can play in the big slot in Evan Ingram, can move around the formation, and they have a dual threat running back out of the backfield. So I think with this Brian Thomas selection, it builds an offense where you have different receivers that are really good at different things, and they all complement each other perfectly. So while I was a little off on them at the end of the season, although a lot of it was due to injury, and I did not love some of their free agency moves, now that the draft is concluded, I love the direction they're headed in just based off the Brian Thomas draft pick.
It will be pretty clear if Trevor Lawrence is the guy or not by the end of this season. Obviously, his draft class has been much maligned. You've got everyone else picked in the first round besides Trevor Lawrence, not on their original teams anymore. And I would not be astounded if the Jaguars moved off Trevor Lawrence in lieu of giving him a massive contract after this year if he doesn't produce in this offensive system. Obviously, their line needs work still. They address that a little bit in free agency, but giving the Minnesota Vikings sloppy seconds at guard doesn't exactly move me one way or the other. But by the end of the year, we will know. Speaking of knowing things, the Kansas City Chiefs appear to know something we all don't. I'm not a fan of the Xavier Worthy pick. I have said he was the wide receiver 6 or 7 before the 40 time, and I hold to that statement. He is in that range. The Chiefs moved up, got him, mortgaged their future draft capital in the draft to get a guy who is a deep threat, who is going to need a long time to develop his NFL routes, and physically is going to get bumped off those routes very easily. We saw it happen to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, two smaller guys who relied heavily on their speed in that Dolphins playoff game in Arrowhead Stadium. When it gets cold outside, when defenses get more physical, I don't think Xavier Worthy is going to be very successful in Kansas City. Obviously, they needed to do something to address that wide receiver position. Right now, it's Hollywood Brown, and it might be Rashee Rice. We still don't know what's going to happen with him in the NFL. I'm holding out hope the NFL does not just try and brush us under the rug and actually does the right thing for once. Not optimistic, though. So I get why they drafted the position, but I was not a fan of the individual player. Say, oh, well, Patrick Mahomes can chuck deep balls to him. There are other fast players in the draft who, if you're willing to trade up, you probably could have come a bit further up and gotten a Brian Thomas or someone like that.
I think he is much more technically refined than you were giving him credit for as far as a route runner. I don't think he is like the typical speedsters we've seen drafted in previous years and went that post a crazy 40 and just fly off the board because of that. I think he's a very good receiver in the NFL. I think he can be. Obviously hasn't been there yet. And it is a loaded receiver class. And it kind of came down to, with a bunch of these prospects, which skill sets do you prefer more? Who do you think fits best into their system? And I would have applauded the pick, whether it would have been Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, Adonai Mitchell. At the end of the day, it is who the Chiefs feel like fit best into their system with a bunch of prospects they had to choose from. So I like the draft pick. I like the fact that they added another receiver to that room. We don't know what's going to happen with the Rashee Rice situation. How many games is he going to be gone for? But if you have all three of those receivers on the field, Xavier Worthy lives up to his potential, Hollywood Brown is as good as he's been in his career, and you have Rashee Rice continue to develop, it is a very good wide receiver trio.
I just don't think it's going to work out. Saying, oh, well, it was technically skilled against Big 12 defenses who very rarely got physical with him and pressed him, or when they did not have the speed to catch up or close the gap if he got past them. Also was not a fan of drafting a developmental BYU tackle out of the Mormon country, but that's neither here nor there. Maybe that works out, maybe that doesn't. The Chiefs have a very good offensive line coach, so I'm inclined to say they can probably get as much as you can get out of that pick.
I like that pick just because I like the idea of continuing to add offensive linemen to your building in every single draft and building them, developing them. You never know when an offensive lineman's going to go down. We see it with a lot of teams several seasons. Offensive line goes down, and then you don't have depth behind them that can even come close to their production. And a lot of time that's going to be the case anyway. But I like the fact they addressed offensive tackle in the second round, and I like the fact that they the tight end they drafted out of TCU. 6'6", 250-pound tight end that runs a 4.6 40, kind of a physical freak to sit behind Travis Kelce, learn in the Andy Reid offense. Travis Kelce just got extended, and I'm not saying he's going to be the next Travis Kelce or even a top 5 tight end in the NFL, but when you put him in that building, in that offense with that coaching staff behind one of the greatest tight ends of all time, I like the fact that they took a chance on that TCU tight end who also had a relatively solid production last year, catching passes from quarterbacks that are not exactly NFL prospects. So I like that pick too.
Our good pal Travis Kelce once bragged about taking less money than he actually deserved for the sake of winning, now being the highest paid tight end in football when he is clearly past his prime. Don't you love it? The Jordan Morgan pick by the Green Bay Packers was stupid. They overdrafted him. I was never a fan of his. I watch offensive tackle film. I like to think I know what I'm talking about generally, having played at a slightly higher level than most other people offensive line-wise. Wasn't a fan of the pick. Cannot understand why he was graded in the first round. And the Packers getting him, you got to replace Bakhtiari. You'd already been replacing Bakhtiari. Bakhtiari plays like 3 games a year, then gets hurt. You had pieces on your depth chart. You could have rolled with them. You could have rolled with a different offensive lineman. You could have gotten depth. You could have gotten a receiver. You could have gotten defensive players of significant caliber. You could have bolstered that secondary. You could have got the most Wisconsin pick ever in Cooper DeJean. He said, no, let's get a mediocre best offensive lineman. Also was not a fan of drafting Edgerrin Cooper. You're drafting a Quay Walker clone, man. You saw that Quay Walker's archetype, the hyper-athletic linebacker from the SEC, does not particularly work out in your draft class. When I look at Edgerrin Cooper, I see the exact same player as Quay Walker. It's not just because of the school he went to. It's not just because of the position he plays, the conference he plays in. They are very similar when you watch the tape. I don't think this pick's going to work out either. I was not an Edgerrin Cooper guy. I'm not a Jordan Morgan guy. I really don't like the Packers draft class. It befuddles me how this class got an A. I'm also not quite sure why you spend a day 2 pick on a running back when you already have signed Josh Jacobs. Maybe you're planning for him to get hurt and have no faith in A.J. Dillon, in which case, hey, why did you re-sign A.J. Dillon and not go after someone else in free agency?
Well, Josh Jacobs' contract is kind of year to year to a certain extent, and Marshawn Lloyd adds another young running back to that backfield. He has a lot of potential to what he can do from the running back position on multiple levels, was very good in college, very productive, very explosive in college. I don't know, I trust the Packers talent evaluators and what they're doing and what they're building. They got the quarterback right. They got the receiver room seemingly right. The defense looks very solid. So I sense a whole lot of hate coming for any other team in the AFC North from the other side of the table.
I will say the Javon Bullard pick was pretty good. They got a good safety to pair alongside Xavier McKinney. But I don't think they got a very good offensive lineman. I think the linebacker they drafted, the pick could have gone in another direction. Well, granted, the front seven stunk. Maybe they could have got some interior defensive linemen to help bolster that, but there was a need there, so I get it from that standpoint. But still, not a fan of the Edgerrin Cooper pick.
Well, you mentioned Cooper DeJean, so why don't we talk about the team that actually drafted him, and a team in the NFC East, a team that we wind up talking a lot about during the regular season because I'm a Giants fan, and the Eagles, they're always talked about. And I was a major critic of the Eagles after the season, during the tail end of the season, when it comes to their defense completely falling apart, their secondary being atrocious. You have to give them credit for going out and drafting 2 corners that were highly touted by everyone on all accounts. They went out, got Quinyon Mitchell in the first round, got Cooper DeJean in the second round. They added pieces to that secondary that have a whole lot of potential. So you have to give them credit for that. And I like the fact they went out and did that. They're one of those teams, like well-run organizations in the NFL, that identify areas of need and they fix them immediately. They don't draft one piece and cross their fingers and hope that one piece is the answer to all their problems, which I actually like.
Would have liked them to go after Jackson Powers Johnson instead of Cooper DeJean in that second round. Try and get the Kelce replacement. Maybe they think they can replace Kelce from within, move a guard over, put someone else in there, whatever, slot him around. I was a big JPJ guy, so I like the Raiders draft in large part because he went there. But Cooper DeJean's going to be fine, maybe a slot corner safety type guy in the NFL, not being our Jackie Robinson, but then again, what are you going to do? And Quinyon Mitchell, tremendous athlete. He played a lot of, I'm going to say off-ball coverage in college. So limited NFL play style experience at Toledo. Wasn't up being man and physical with guys. Just kind of waited for the curl route to be thrown, then got up on them. So I think there's going to be a pretty big learning curve for him. Certainly a bigger learning curve for him than DeJean. But all in all, fine draft class. Addressing an area of need, always a nice thing. Surely one of those guys will work out.
What I will say, even though I like the draft class and I like the positions they address to kind of address their biggest weakness, is that when it comes to the Eagles next season, it's really going to come down to the coordinators they hired on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, and whether or not Nick Sirianni can kind of keep that locker room together, because
this has nothing to do with the draft.
It fell apart.
And it's just you hating on the Eagles.
It fell apart last season, and when it comes to Howie Roseman and their drafting in general, I think it does have a tendency to get a little overrated, because he does have a tendency to kind of draft players that in the media are very popular during the draft process that also happen to fall down the board. I mean, last year was Nolan Smith falling to 30. How did he get Nolan Smith? Hasn't really produced or done anything in the NFL yet.
Imagine that. Developmental pieces need a little bit more time in the NFL.
Do you ever let me finish
It's a stupid point. You made a video hyping up Nolan Smith prior to last year's draft.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did. Also, say, oh, well, Nolan Smith didn't contribute much as a rookie. Look what was in front of him. Look at the dysfunctionality at coordinator. Coordinator's already gone. And look at what he was coming out. The reason he was a first-round pick is because he tested well, but was clearly going to need time. Was a rotational player at Georgia, because all their players are rotational. That is, the Nolan Smith part of this criticism pisses me off. It really does.
Keely Ringo did not exactly step in and help a secondary that was struggling in a big way. Nakobe Dean hasn't stepped in and done that much. Jordan Davis, everyone applauded that pick because of the athletic freak that he is. He's not stepped up in and done a lot. So there is a valid criticism to the Howie Roseman draft classes in recent years that they're applauded so much at the time, and then when it comes down to it, he hasn't exactly drafted perennial all-pros and superstars with these picks that have been so highly touted.
You literally just applauded the draft class because he drafted Cooper DeJean, a player who was incredibly hyped in the media and fell to the second round. And then you're going to say, oh, well, actually, like, you are... Pick a side on this one. Was it a good pick or not?
I applauded the draft picks because of the positions they addressed, and that they went out, identified areas where they clearly could get better because they were horrible last season, and they spent high-end draft capital on those positions.
The Baltimore Ravens. And I'm going to start off by talking about a later-round pick in Tez Walker. And I think he's got a lot of athletic upside, but in that Senior Bowl process after the Combine, you saw his stock kind of fall a little bit when he had quarterbacks other than Drake May throwing to him in college. Admittedly, small sample size his senior year and due to NCAA stupidity. What are you going to do about that? But paired with what they have, paired with Zay Flowers, paired with potential man and Rashad Bateman and their tight end room, I think they can be a pretty good pick. It's replacing Odell Beckham. I don't think there's going to be that big of a fall in production from him in the aggregate from losing Odell.
It's not hard to replace old Odell. And I mean, like the Eagles, I like what the Ravens did. They went out, got the fastest corner in the draft, who also happens to be 6'1". The only knock on him is that he's not all that big of a frame, and he's kind of a lighter corner, so he may not be the best tackler when you ask him to go out and tackle running backs or make a tackle on a bigger receiver. So there's that weakness to his game. But they also went out and got the tackle from Washington who didn't allow a sack in college, that has some guard flexibility where they needed to fill a spot on the offensive line, whether it be tackle or guard. So spending their first two picks on those positions of need, they got younger at DB, added athleticism to that secondary, added a very good offensive line piece to their offensive line.
Say his name.
Roger Rosengarten.
Okay, I thought that was one of the goofy pronunciation ones. Just wanted to make sure. Had that thing locked and loaded. I know we did not talk about any of the Tungan tackles. I was just making sure you could pronounce. Yeah, because I noticed you were avoiding it. You kept saying the tackle out of Washington instead of Rosengard. I thought, okay, is he scared to pronounce this guy's name?
It was a lot of letters. I was just shortening things. Roger Rosengarten.
There you go.
The only thing that I am a little worried about for the Ravens is that they haven't really addressed edge. They're putting a whole lot of faith in Adisa Isaac out of Penn State to generate a pass rush for them. They lost Jadeveon Clowney in free agency. Odafe Owe, he's been solid to okay in the NFL so far.
You're saying Owe's been okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm never fucking with you. You have the sense of humor and wordplay of a stump. Shit, man. Adoe's been okay. Yeah, whatever. That pisses me off. That pisses me off more than the Cooper DeJean stuff. Now I'm stepping in here. You're right. The edge position could have been addressed, but you look at what picks were made. Never been a huge Nate Wiggins guy. But if you are going to have to cover speedier receivers like the Xavier Worthies of the world in the playoffs, like the Khalil Shakirs of the world, you want someone who can keep up with them. Granted, not being able to tackle as a cornerback is not exactly part of the Ravens' way, but what are you going to do about that? They had a fine draft, nothing to write home about. Standard good team addressing positions of need, and maybe not getting better in the offseason, but trying to mitigate the losses.
Perfect way to put it. The New York Football Giants, a team Isaiah loves to talk about. And when it comes to their draft class, I kind of just have to shrug my shoulders at it. The Giants...
Malik Neighbors hates his life because of the Giants.
The way the Giants have drafted in recent years, the way their seasons have gone, not filled with a whole lot of optimism. I like Malik Neighbors a lot. I like the fact that they added a high-end weapon to that offense, albeit for Daniel Jones to throw to.
There's no such thing as a high-end weapon in that offense.
It's better than fighting with a bunch of water pistols and wide receiver threes and maybe one day wide receiver twos.
It's trying to fill up a fire hose with your kitchen faucet at quarterback.
And I think the rest of their draft class has potential. I mean, they drafted a safety who was highly regarded by many as the best safety in the draft. Nick Saban had that to say about Tyler Nubin. They drafted a tight end with a very good athletic profile. They didn't address offensive line again, so we're relying on Evan Neal to be an above-average starter at right tackle, and the pieces they signed in free agency to be quality starters. So from that standpoint,
they're
not they're cooked. You could say that. Not exactly all that jazzed about the draft. And they got Tyrone Tracy out of Purdue to work into that backfield as a running back, averaged 6.3 yards a carry last year, transitioned from wide receiver.
Hopefully he can transition from the practice squad at some point this year.
Not a whole lot of draft picks. I see the upside and the vision with all of the draft picks they made, but when it comes to like Theo Johnson from Penn State, he doesn't have a whole lot of production in college. Will he have production in the NFL with Daniel Jones throwing him the ball?
Oh, of course not, but he's an athletic freak. That's why they drafted Neighbors, too. They're building for the future, Tristan, and hoping whichever quarterback they draft, and I think it'd be really funny if it was Shedeur next year, can put something together with this system. Things are looking bleak right now for you. They really are.
Shoulder shrug. That's all I got.
And in terms of the Jets, Olave Fashanu is my favorite tackle in the draft. The criticisms of his run block are massively overblown. And hey, when you have Aaron Rodgers on your team and are throwing the ball however many times they are, you don't need to run block. Anyway, those were our thoughts on the draft. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Did we miss anyone? Are we woefully incorrect about your favorite team who actually had an A+ draft and we don't know ball? Let us know down in the comments.